The market lights of Verdun 9 flickered like dying stars, trapped behind dust-streaked glass and smoke trails that curled from the exhaust of cargo drones. Cale moved through the crowd as if through a dream that had already ended, his old uniform hidden beneath a scavenger's coat, his boots crunching over metal shavings and spilled coolant. The air reeked of oil, blood, and cheap plasma fuel. Voices echoed in dozens of languages, haggling not over goods, but lives. Bioengineered slaves, half-conscious androids, and creatures too intelligent to beg lined the cages, their eyes reflecting the pulsing neon. Cale kept walking, telling himself he was only there to trade parts, to buy rations, to keep his outpost alive for one more week. But deep inside, he knew that was a lie. He had come because of a hollow ache that no amount of silence could fill. The auctioneer's voice rose over the noise, a shrill, gleeful sound cutting through the chaos. Cale turned, more out of instinct than interest. A crowd had gathered near the center platform, where a massive containment field hummed. Within it, something shifted. The light refracted over a scaled surface, bruised and dulled, like molten glass turned to ash. It was a dragon, or what the New Worlds called a biodrake, engineered long ago from the remnants of extinct starborn species. But Cale saw more than a weaponized creature. He saw exhaustion, a trembling breath, wings torn and bound with energy cuffs. Around her, 5 hatchlings huddled together, their tiny bodies barely moving. He should have turned away. Dragons were property, regulated, dangerous. Yet his feet carried him closer. He could hear her breathing, ragged, defiant, alive. For a moment, their eyes met through the shimmer of the field. Golden eyes. Ancient eyes. And in their depth, Cale saw himself reflected, broken, abandoned, still fighting to survive when survival no longer meant anything. Lot 92, the auctioneer announced. A full-grown matriarch-class drake and her offspring. Damaged but fertile. Opening bid, 5,000 credits. Laughter rippled through the crowd. The traders wanted sleek androids or weaponized drones, not relics of a forgotten war. Cale's pulse quickened. He reached into his coat and touched the cold metal of his credit wafer. His mind screamed that this was madness, that he had no use for them, that they'd die within days anyway. But his heart, what was left of it, moved first. 5,000, he said. The words left his mouth like a detonation. The crowd turned, curious now. The auctioneer grinned, scenting desperation. 5,000, from the human. Going once. 6,000, shouted another voice. A merchant, testing him. Cale's jaw tightened. 7. The air vibrated with the hum of the containment field. 8. 10. The merchant swore and stepped back. The auctioneer's grin widened. Sold. A moment later, the field dimmed. The mother dragon lifted her head, weak but watchful. Cale stepped forward as the locks disengaged, the chains clattering to the floor. The hatchlings stirred, their scales glinting faintly under the market lights. For the first time in years, Cale didn't feel like a soldier, or a ghost wandering through the wreckage of his own past. He felt something else, something terrifying and fragile. Responsibility. As the dragon's gaze lingered on him, the old soldier realized he had just bought more than a creature. He had bought a promise he didn't yet understand. The transport crawled through the dunes like a dying beast, its engines coughing sparks under the glare of Verdun 9's twin suns. Inside, Cale sat beside the containment capsule that held the dragon mother and her young. The air smelled of ozone and scorched metal, every bump on the sand sending shudders through the vehicle's brittle frame. He could feel their unease, the faint tremor of claws against alloy, the quickened breath of living fire caged in silence. He reached for the control panel, dimmed the stasis field slightly, letting more oxygen through. The mother stirred. Her eyes opened, ancient gold shimmering faintly in the gloom. When the outpost came into view, it looked even smaller than Cale remembered, a patchwork of steel walls, antenna arrays, and the skeletal remains of war drones buried half in sand. The horizon shimmered with heat, hiding the endless desert that stretched toward forgotten battlefields. He landed the transport beside a collapsed comm tower and began unloading supplies. The dragons watched from within their capsule, the hatchlings pressing against the barrier like children afraid of the dark. Kale hesitated before unlocking the chamber. He'd faced insurgents, plasma storms, and orbital bombardments, but this felt different. As the energy field dissolved, the scent of heat and dust filled the air. The mother stepped out slowly, her movements cautious, protective. The hatchlings followed, each one blinking at the harsh light, wings twitching in confusion. Kale stayed still, his weapon holstered but ready. He knew they were reading him, measuring his scent, his heartbeat, the intent behind every breath. "You're safe here," he said softly, not expecting comprehension. Yet something flickered in her gaze, an almost imperceptible tilt of the head, as if the sound of his voice mattered. Hours passed before the tension eased. Kale rigged the outpost's thermal vents to maintain the heat levels they needed, using scavenged panels and the old fusion heater from his combat armor. He rationed his food, sharing what protein synth he had. The dragons ate reluctantly at first, then hungrily, their strength returning by degrees. When night fell, the desert wind howled through the vents, carrying grains of silver sand that shimmered like falling stars. Kale sat by the fire module, cleaning his plasma rifle in silence. The hatchlings slept in a circle around their mother. Every now and then, the largest of them twitched, small sparks flickering from its nostrils. The mother's eyes remained open, reflecting the blue glow of the power cells. Kale met her gaze again and, for a heartbeat, felt something stir deep within his chest, a quiet understanding neither of them could name. He thought about the war, the faces of those he'd lost, the orders he'd followed without question. He had been good at destroying things. But here, surrounded by fragile lives that depended on him, destruction felt meaningless. The silence of the desert pressed against the outpost walls, vast and endless. Somewhere beyond the dunes, lightning flickered from old orbital debris breaking atmosphere, a storm of forgotten satellites falling back to the planet that no longer needed them. Kale watched the faint glow through the viewport, the dragons breathing steady behind him, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. The days on Verdun 9 bled together in tones of bronze and blue, the heat so thick it bent light itself. Kale rose each morning before the suns crested the horizon, checking the perimeter drones, scavenging parts from the wrecks that dotted the desert. The dragons had begun to adapt. The hatchlings grew restless, their scales brightening, their wings stretching wider with each cycle. The smallest one, Luma, as Kale had started calling her, followed him everywhere, her tiny claws clicking softly against the outpost floor. She had learned his rhythms, the sound of his boots, the hum of his breath. Sometimes she would mimic the sound of his voice through faint, harmonic vibrations in her throat, a language of tone rather than words. He spent long hours repairing the fusion grid, rerouting power to sustain the artificial heat that kept them alive. The dragon's physiology demanded warmth beyond what the desert could give at night. He scavenged old plasma conduits and reprogrammed his maintenance bots to regulate temperature around their nesting area. When the systems pulsed to life, faint orange light glowed against the walls, reflecting off their scales like the memory of sunrise. The mother, Sereth, began to trust him enough to eat from his hand. She still watched him carefully, golden eyes full of memory and caution. One evening, as the winds outside grew violent, Kale detected a signal spike on his comm array, a faint encrypted pulse repeating every 30 seconds. He recognized the pattern immediately. Military-grade tracking frequency. His stomach tightened. Someone was searching the wastelands. He shut down all power except life support and waited in the dark, listening to the silent stretch. In the corner, the hatchlings whimpered softly. Luma pressed against his leg, trembling. He rested a hand on her back, feeling the rhythm of her heartbeat beneath scales that glowed faintly in the dark. When the storm subsided, Kale climbed to the roof and scanned the horizon with his old visor. Through static interference, he caught a glimpse of movement, lights flickering along the ridge, too organized to be scavengers. Mercenary scouts. He knew their kind, men who sold their loyalties to the highest bidder. His past had caught up with him faster than he'd hoped. Inside, Sereth was awake, tail coiled protectively around her young. She could sense the danger, smell the fear he was trying to hide. A low growl rolled from her chest, vibrating through the floor panels. Kale knelt beside her, the heat of her body almost burning through his gloves. "If they come," he whispered, "we move. You understand?" Her gaze locked on his, and though no words passed, something did, recognition, trust born not from kindness, but from shared instinct. That night, Kale prepared for battle with quiet efficiency. He checked his rifle, repaired the motion sensors, buried his signal beacons. The outpost was no longer a home, it was a defensive line. Yet even as he armed himself, he felt a strange peace. He had someone to protect again, not soldiers, not commanders, but lives that depended on him because they believed he would stand. And as the first faint light of dawn touched the dunes, Luma climbed onto his shoulder, wings folded, eyes bright with curiosity. Kale smiled despite himself. The war might find him again, but this time, he was no longer fighting for orders. He was fighting for family. The first explosion tore through the silence like the sky itself had cracked open. Kale woke before the alarms, his instincts older than thought. The motion sensors flared red across the control board, multiple heat signatures approaching from the east. Through the viewport, he saw them, sleek desert skimmers cutting through the dunes, banners of dust trailing behind, their hulls marked with the insignia of the Ether Syndicate. Mercenaries, armed and relentless. His past had finally found its way home. He moved fast, sealing the habitat doors, activating the defensive grid he'd built from scavenged drone parts. Sereth was already awake, her body a silhouette of molten gold in the half-light. The hatchling stirred around her, sensing the shift in the air. "Stay below," he told her, pointing toward the lower shelter. She didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. Her wings tightened around her young, a silent promise. Outside, the desert trembled beneath the roar of engines. Kale grabbed his plasma rifle, the metal warm against his palms, and stepped into the blinding light. The first volley hit the outer wall, ion rounds sizzling through the shield barrier. He fired back, the beam slicing one of the skimmers clean in two. The wreck erupted in a storm of fire and sand. For a moment, he felt like the soldier he had once been, precise, merciless, alive. But this time there was no command structure, no victory to chase, only survival. The mercenaries spread out, their suits glinting with synthetic armor that shimmered against the heat. Kale triggered the perimeter mines he'd buried days ago, the ground erupted beneath them, sending shards of plasma glass into the air. 2 men fell, their visors cracked, screams lost to the storm. Still, they kept coming. He retreated toward the ridge, drawing them away from the shelter. Every step was calculated, every heartbeat an echo of the wars he'd sworn to forget. From the outpost, Saratha's roar split the sky. It wasn't the cry of a beast, it was a storm made flesh. Flames cascaded upward, orange and violet, bending around her form as she burst from the hatch with wings spread wide. The heat hit Kale like a wave. She swept over the battlefield, incinerating the front line. The mercenaries scattered in terror, their armor melting under her breath. Yet each burst of fire came at a cost, her wounds reopened, blood glowing like molten silver across her scales. Kale ran toward her, cutting down what was left of the raiders, shouting for her to stop, to retreat. But she didn't. She turned her fury toward the sky, unleashing one final blast that lit the desert like sunrise. The last skimmer detonated, and the shockwave threw Kale into the sand. He hit hard, the world going white for a moment. When the light dimmed, the battlefield was silent. The raiders were gone, nothing left but smoldering wreckage and the acrid scent of ionized air. Kale staggered to his feet, vision blurred. Sereth was lying near the outpost, her chest rising shallowly, wings tattered. He ran to her, kneeling beside the massive form. Her eyes met his, tired, but alive. Around her, the hatchlings whimpered, pressing close to their mother. Kale's hands shook as he reached out, resting a palm against her scorched scales. "You're safe now," he whispered, though his voice cracked with exhaustion. The words meant little, but she blinked once in slow acknowledgement. Then, against the still air, came a faint sound, small, melodic, uncertain. He turned. Luma had climbed onto his arm, eyes glowing softly, and through the translator chip he'd installed days before, he heard her voice, fragile, trembling, but unmistakably human. "Dad." The word hung in the air like an echo from another lifetime. Kale froze, every breath suspended as the tiny dragon's voice trembled through the translator link. The sound was imperfect, broken by static, but it carried something real, something that pierced through the armor of silence he had built around himself. Luma blinked, her eyes glowing with soft bioluminescence, unaware of what she had done. Sereth lifted her head weakly, a low, approving rumble resonating from deep within her chest. Kale didn't speak. He couldn't. His throat felt thick with the dust of 100 unspoken years. Instead, he reached out and touched Luma's snout gently. Her scales were warm beneath his calloused hand, her pulse quick and fragile. "Dad," she repeated, this time more confident, the tone clearer. It wasn't mimicry, there was intent, emotion, learning. Kale had seen advanced AI struggle to replicate empathy, yet this small creature had bridged that chasm through instinct alone. The following days blurred into a strange rhythm of healing and rebuilding. Kale repaired the shelter with pieces scavenged from the raider wrecks, armor plating for walls, thruster cores turned into energy converters. The outpost began to hum with new life. The hatchlings played among the dunes, their wings catching the desert wind for the first time. Luma followed Kale constantly, her voice growing stronger, her mimicry sharper. She could form simple phrases now. His name, home, and sometimes, when the suns dipped below the horizon, safe. Sereth recovered slowly, though her wounds never fully closed. She watched Kale with an expression that hovered between wariness and gratitude. They communicated through gestures and tones, and sometimes through silence alone. Kale learned her patterns, the rhythm of her breathing, the soft flare of her nostrils when danger was near. It wasn't speech, but it was understanding, and it was enough. At night, Kale would sit by the fire unit and watch the sky. The remnants of orbital debris shimmered above, fragments of human ambition that had long since lost purpose. Luma would curl beside him, radiating faint heat. He told her stories then, not of battles or victories, but of rain, of oceans, of the sound of music before the wars stripped it away. She would listen with her head tilted, her tail curled around his arm, her golden eyes reflecting the stars. But peace, Kale knew, was a temporary illusion. The raiders would not vanish forever, and the corporations would come searching for their lost assets. He spent his nights modifying the outpost's defense grid, programming old drones to respond to his neural signature, turning the desert itself into a silent sentinel. Yet the fear that once drove him was gone, replaced by something else, resolve. One morning, as the first light crept over the dunes, Luma stood before him, wings spread, scales catching the dawn. "Fly," she said softly, and then, as if understanding the meaning herself, she leapt. The air shimmered around her, her small form rising awkwardly, then steadily. Kale watched, heart pounding. She turned once in the air and let out a cry, half dragon, half child, then glided down to him with effortless grace. He laughed, a sound he hadn't heard from himself in years. It startled even Sereth. For a fleeting moment, beneath the endless desert sky, the broken soldier and the orphan dragons belonged to the same fragile dream, a family born not of blood, but of fire and choice. The warning came in the dead of night, a silent tremor through the ground, followed by the faint hum of orbital engines. Kale woke instantly, the old soldier in him sensing the shift in air pressure before the scanners confirmed it. Dozens of signatures, descending fast from the upper atmosphere. Corporate drones, sleek and silver, sweeping the desert in perfect formation. Their search had finally led them here. He moved quickly, sealing the dragons inside the shelter, activating every defense he had built. The air around the outpost shimmered with heat as the automated cannons powered on. Sareth growled, restless, sensing the tension. "No," Kale said, placing a hand on her snout. "You protect them. That's all that matters." She looked at him for a long moment, then bowed her head in understanding. Luma pressed against his chest, trembling, her voice breaking through the translator with quiet desperation. "Stay. Dad." He smiled faintly, brushing her scales with a trembling hand. "I have to finish this." The first barrage hit the shields like a hammer. Plasma flares streaked across the dunes, lighting the night in eerie blue fire. Kale moved through the chaos with machine precision, targeting drones, detonating mines, rerouting power from the life support grid. His armor sparked from near misses, his vision filled with dust and light. Above, the fleet's main cruiser descended, massive, metallic, indifferent. Through the calm static, a voice rang out, "Property detected. Surrender the assets, or be neutralized." Kale's laughter cracked through the static, low and feral. He opened the old command console, one he had reprogrammed weeks earlier, and entered the final code, a remnant from his military service, tied to orbital defense satellites abandoned after the wars. The system hesitated, then confirmed the lock. He whispered into the receiver, "For once, make it count." The sky tore open. Blinding light streaked down from orbit, a precision strike that devoured the horizon. The shockwave lifted sand and flame into the heavens, turning night to day. Kale was thrown backward, armor splitting, body burning. He barely felt the impact. Through the haze, he saw Sareth rising from the flames, wings glowing with molten light, her roar shaking the stars themselves. She reached him as the firestorm consumed the desert. He felt her claws close around him, the heat of her body shielding him from the inferno. They burst through the wall of light together, into the upper air where the world fell silent. Below them, the outpost was gone, reduced to glass and shadow. Above, dawn broke through the clouds, pale and golden. Kale lay against her neck, vision fading, but he could see the hatchlings circling around them, flying free for the first time. "You're safe," he whispered, his voice barely a breath. Sareth turned her head, eyes like twin suns, and released a sound that was neither growl nor cry, a farewell, perhaps, or gratitude. Luma's small form appeared beside him, wings steady in the wind. Her voice came through the calm once more, soft as memory. "Dad, stay." Kale smiled. "Always." When the suns rose fully over Verdun, 6 shadows crossed the light, 1 large, 5 small, drifting toward the horizon. The world below burned clean, but in the sky, something new began, a family reborn, bound not by origin, but by choice.